Welcome everyone to a bit of an experiment. I shall be reading The Machine Stops by Forster, parts of it. There is no prepared lecture, and I will not focus too much on the story. I will simply pick out a few of the quotes. The reason why I think this text is prescient, it's from 1909, so more than 111 years ago. It was written by Forster and published in the Oxford and Cambridge Review. Now this text is it is the new version, it is the modern contemporary version of Plato's Cave. It is the cave rewritten for our age. The machine stops what we can imagine as human beings living underneath the earth in what they call the machine. And what they do is they all live in separate isolated cells. They all are connected to each other through what we would now call YouTube or Zoom or Skype, and they exchange ideas. Because one of the things that you learn once you get into this online philosophy, or whatever you want to call it, is that there's a certain danger present too, right? It can become quite vacuous, that people say, oh, I've had a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for this conversation. And basically what's being talked about is just another conversation. So that we're being affected by ideas, and we need a constant inflow of new ideas and new content ideas, the most Platonic term of all, which then affect us and then gives us this sensation of, oh, I'm being transformed here. I'm becoming someone new, and it's kind of almost empty formalism, right? I'm being transformed by a conversation. I'm being transformed by all these ideas that I'm listening to on my way to work, for example, which you might be doing actually with this video, of course, as well. But there's always a danger in everything that we engage in, which is, it's almost too obvious to even say this. So, and I'm trying to be rather self-aware of what this is, because once we get into online philosophy, we are becoming creators of shadows. We are becoming those who at once sit in Plato's cave, down there in the cave looking at the shadows, but we also are shadow makers or masters of shadow puppets. And I think we must be very aware, all of us who engage in this, that we don't just stay on the level of shadows, and that perhaps also we attempt to translate this into deed, into proper ways of being, and not just the perception of having been transformed by something that affects us because it sounds profound and out of the ordinary compared to the nonsense that's going on elsewhere. But The Machine Stops is really this retelling of Plato's Cave for us today. And I think that you will find it, if you don't know the story yet, you will find it very prescient, to say the least, about us today, and about me, for example, sitting here talking into a dead camera lens and then putting this up on the internet, where people see my avatar and mistake that avatar with me, and also mistake and think that they've got access to me and know who I am, which you don't, and which also you won't just by seeing me on a video screen. And so it's perhaps the warning is to, if there's any kind of engagement that we because we have to deal with these tools, right? And we have to deal with these powers upon us and with these forces that we can summon, but also then we must be very aware that who we're seeing is not someone, it's an avatar. And there is at least a tremendous, we must be mindful of distance, of almost an infinite distance between us here and the person we're looking at. And that perhaps can trigger some proper learning. But let me now read from The Machine Stops very briefly. The main characters are called Vashti and Kuno. Vashti is the mother of Kuno. But the story will not be important. And this is a bit of an experiment. I haven't prepared a talk. I will simply be reading some of the passages that I find most important, and then perhaps interpret them as I go along. But some of them are so forceful, they simply speak for themselves. So here we are. Imagine, if you can, a small room, hexagonal in shape like the cell of a bee. It is lighted neither by window nor by lamp, yet it is filled with a soft radiance. There are no apertures for ventilation, yet the air is fresh. There are no musical instruments, and yet at the moment that my meditation opens, says the narrator of the story. So he's referring here, quite obviously, to René Descartes, to the 6 meditations. So while this meditation opens, this room is throbbing with melodious sounds. An armchair is in the center. By its side, a reading desk. That is all the furniture. And in the armchair there sits a swaddled lump of flesh, a woman, about 5 feet high, with a face as white as a fungus. It is to her that the little room belongs. An electric bell rang. The woman touched a switch and the music was silent. I suppose I must see who it is, she thought, and set her chair in motion. She doesn't walk, of course. The chair, like the music, was worked by machinery, and it rolled her to the other side of the room, where the bell still rang impertinently. Who is it? She called. Her voice was irritable, for she had been interrupted often since the music began. She knew several thousand people, several thousand friends. In certain directions, human intercourse had advanced enormously, but of course she's never physically in touch with any of them. But when she listened into the receiver, her white face wrinkled into smiles, and she said, "Very well, let us talk. I will isolate myself. I do not expect anything important will happen for the next 5 minutes, for I can give you fully 5 minutes, Kuno," her son. "Then I must deliver my lecture on music during the Australian period." So she gives lectures online to an online audience, as you would say today, on something that's historically very interesting, but something that's so of the past it no longer speaks to us at all. They live underground, they live underneath the earth in something that they call the machine, capital M, and something they pray to as the machine, capital M, but still they're very interested, epidermally interested, as Nietzsche would put it, indeed, in music during the Australian period. You see, that's the spirit of historicism. That's what Heidegger means by Historie. That's deadening. It's not access to Geschichte, to proper deep history. It's the exact opposite. We may have all the data, all the information whatsoever, but it's pointless. It's meaningless. It's simply some interest that you have in something that was of the past, but it means nothing, because literally where they are is underneath the surface, incapable of seeing even the light of the sun, or incapable of dying, as we shall see. So she touched the isolation knob so that no one else could speak to her. Then she touched the lighting apparatus, and the little room was plunged into darkness. "Be quick," she called, her irritation returning. "Be quick, Kuno. Here I am in the dark, wasting my time." It's already not used efficiently, right? But it was fully 15 seconds before the round plate that she held, round plate like a tablet, she held in her hands, began to glow. A faint blue light shot across it, darkening to purple. And presently she could see the image of her son, who lived on the other side of the earth, and he could see her. "Kuno, how slow you are." He smiled gravely. "I really believe you enjoy dawdling. I have called you before, mother, but you were always busy or isolated. I have something particular to say." What is it, dearest boy? Be quick. Why could you not send it by pneumatic post? Because I prefer saying such a thing in person. I want you to come and see me, he says. Vashti, the mother, watched his face in the blue plate. But I can see you, she exclaimed. What more do you want? I want to see you not through the machine, said Kuno. I want to speak to you not through the wearisome machine. Oh, hush, said his mother, vaguely shocked. You mustn't say anything against the machine. Why not? One mustn't. Simply one mustn't. And then, of course, it continues on the machine, and he wants her to come to the other side. He wants her to take an airplane, and so she will do that. And however, she says something very peculiar here. She says, I dislike, because when you actually fly to the other side of the earth, you have to see the earth. And she says, I dislike seeing the horrible brown earth and the sea and the stars when it is dark. I get no ideas in an airship. That might actually be true, that you get no proper ideas in an airship. But the trouble here is, of course, that she's no longer being affected then by the constant flow of content, which she requires in order to keep her boredom stilled and her desires fulfilled in this vicious circular manner. So she dislikes the earth, and of course that's an expression of the homo faber, the instrumental, machinical man who despises the earth, its brownness. Very interesting, though. She dislikes to see the sea, she says, but a bit later on, she then listens to, in the story, she listens to someone give a lecture on the sea. And I think somewhere, I'm not sure if I can find this now, she will say something like, it's very good to listen to a talk on the sea because the sea gives one ideas. I'm not finding it now, but that's, so the sea itself, the thing itself, isn't where any idea could originate from, but no, the idea originates from only out of some online 10-minute, easily digestible lecture that affects this content desire machine that is now what the human mind has been reduced to. Now, they all live in these cells where it's being described as follows, right? There were buttons and switches everywhere. Buttons to call for food, for music, for clothing. There was the hot bath button, by pressure of which a basin of imitation, of course, marble rose out of the floor, filled to the brim with a warm deodorized liquid. There was the cold bath button. There was the button that produced literature. And there were, of course, the buttons by which she communicated with her friends. The room, though it contained nothing, was in touch with all she cared for in the world. The room contains no thing, nothing. But just everything's there, right there at a fingertip, available, accessible to her, all that she could require without even moving. Now, of course, then she turns off the isolation mode so that she gets, she's back in touch with her thousands of contacts and friends. And what happens, all the accumulations of the last 3 minutes burst upon her. The room was filled with the noise of bells and speaking tubes. What was the new food like? Could she recommend it? Notice something? Had she any ideas lately? 3 minutes. 3 minutes. Might one tell her one's own ideas? Would she make an engagement to visit the public nurseries at an early date? Yada yada. To most of these questions, she replied with irritation, a growing quality in that accelerated age. It's almost like reading something written right around this year. Ever-growing irritation. You see, the danger of all of this content is that it just irritates us even more. Is that it's just confusing ultimately. Because we require contemplation and meditation and proper thinking through, and that doesn't just come from listening to podcasts. I'm probably not selling this very well now, what I'm doing, but still, it requires, not that it mustn't become a distraction. It mustn't. If that's what we do to produce distractions, then we are the machine. Then there is no exit from the cave. Then we have become shadow masters of shadow puppets, but we've given up on freedom. Now, then of course she switches off again to give her time on Australian music. And here, this is something that could be, almost, it's so prescient. Listen to this. She opened with a humorous account of music in the pre-Mongolian epoch. Haha, something funny, of course, to lighten up the room, and went on to describe the great outburst of song that followed the Chinese conquest. Means nothing to her because they live underground. It's completely meaningless to speak of Mongolian and Chinese conquest and whatnot. Remote and primeval as were the methods of Isan So and the Brisbane School, she said that study of them might repay the musicians of today. They had freshness, they had above all ideas. So you see what he's describing here is that all of what history has brought up is just stored in this data storage of the past, from which we now draw and deduce and take ideas and put them in our minds to be affected by them. But it's nothing genuine. There's nothing that comes from bottom up and lives through us so that we need to enact. It's simply about being affected by these ideas in order to what? To regurgitate these ideas in another talk. Now, she describes then very interestingly the civilization of the time before the age of the machine, before the universal establishment of the machine, as it's called here. So of course she had studied the civilization that had immediately preceded her own. The civilization, which would be ours for now, to some degree, that had mistaken the functions of the system and had used it for bringing people to things instead of for bringing things to people. Those funny old days when men went for change of air instead of changing the air in their rooms. So we see that the machine is the system that makes it possible for the human being to keep at a distance everything that is. Hence, there is no world. There is simply affect of the mind, but what comes along with that, a certain frailty of nerves and as Nietzsche says, an epidermal interest. Like Nietzsche says somewhere in the Nachlass, in the unpublished notebooks, we Europeans, we modern Europeans, what are we like? We are very interested indeed, but only epidermally interested. Nothing goes underneath our skin. Now, what is it though, this world that they live in, this constellation, this machine they live in, is one where their understanding of what it means to be human, their understanding of reason, is simply that reason is a tool that they have that they use in order to solve mental problems, which is a complete misunderstanding of what the word problem means, right? But Karl Popper, of course, said all of life is problem solving. So he should have perhaps read The Machine Stops Before and thought for a second what he might be saying there. Anyways, let me move on to a rather interesting remark here. So she actually does take a plane that and flies to her son. So she's on this airplane, and she says, "No ideas here," and hid Greece behind a metal blind. So she shuts off Greece. Of course, this is not by mistake or not a coincidence that Forster would choose Greece. The origin of this thought, of the idea per se, but no longer Does Greece give her any ideas? Perhaps a talk on Plato would have done that. An interesting talk, of course, but not Plato himself, because what she wants, of course, is to use her time efficiently by learning about what someone else has said about someone else, right? In this world, no darkness, no death, no death, and only the humming of the machine. The machine hums. Did you know that? Its hum penetrates our blood and may even guide our thoughts. Who knows? I was getting beyond its power. Then I thought, this silence means that I am doing wrong. So the machine is that which gives the ideas ultimately its humming, right? So this total neglect of silence, of stillness, is at the heart of the machine. The machine itself keeps the body shaking, the blood shaking, for all intents and purposes. Now, it's very interesting that it's always a peculiar historical interest of which they speak. There must always be, so for example, here there's a lecture being described where it's about the rise of Wessex. Completely meaningless, right? You live underground in a machine without teeth, and you're pale as it gets. And why would the rise of Wessex be in any way meaningful? But you see, as an analogy to us today, we have to be careful whether or not this ism or that ism or the other ism or some perhaps Stoic emperor is that maybe a model by which we can live? Perhaps not, because perhaps we live in a completely different age. So this access to history, this proper access to proper history, is something else entirely than just reading propositionally about what someone might have said at some point. There's a different access to that, and we'll get to this in my lectures on history, which are coming up. And actually, you can watch properly listen to the Origin of Thinking playlist, which might help here. Now, I'm looking for, so there's this distrust of silence, of course. There's this distrust of anything that's not been dealt with by a lecturer, right? So it must have gone through the objectivity of the lecturer, so that ideas actually become proper ideas. Because here she says, one of the most advanced lecturers says, beware of first-hand ideas. Exclaimed one of the most advanced lecturers. First-hand ideas do not really exist. They are but physical impressions produced by love and fear, and on this gross foundation who could erect a philosophy? Let your ideas be second-hand, and if possible 10th-hand, for then they will be far removed from that disturbing element, direct observation. Do not learn anything about this subject of mine, the French Revolution. Learn instead what I think, that Enchiramon thought, Urizen thought, Gutch thought, Ho Jung thought, Chi Bo Sing thought, Lafcadia, Hearn thought, Carlyle thought, Mirabeau said about the French Revolution. That's basically a very neat description of academic publishing. In any discipline, except maybe for the natural sciences, I'm not sure. Through the medium of these 10 great minds, the blood that was shed at Paris and the windows that were broken at Versailles will be clarified to an idea. You see, it's moving to this abstract realm of sheer given data and historical information without any access to anything, because the machine is humming, and so any silence that could induce a certain horror and terror and shock and a sense of wonder and awe to take people back into the world is something we want. We don't want to look at the sea. No, we want to hear a lecture about the sea, to be affected by ideas. Now, there's an abandonment of earth here, an abandonment of the sky, an abandonment of mortality, which is why, of course, there's a machine of the machine, which is called euthanasia. And euthanasia is at some point even fails to work, Al-Shanaka into this, but when it fails to work, as they say here, pain reappeared among men. So they were even alleviated from the pain of death and dying, and ultimately also of silence that could come. So here at some point the machine stops in the story. And Vashti breaks down. Then she broke down, for with the cessation of activity came an unexpected terror, silence. Almost nothing. Silence kicks in, and an unexpected terror begins. Silence itself is the terror. And that, of course, is the horror vacui. Rather than not willing at all, the human being rather wants nothing. And this silence was entirely consumed by the machine. But without silence, we never arrive at ourselves, we never arrive at the world. It is from within or from without silence that world can arise, and that care for beings and others can arise. Silence is in some sense also a bit of in some sense, distance as well. Now, as the machine stops, ideas stop. Ideas stop to come, and they begin to be freed for some reason, but they also die. So the machine stops is, I guess, easy to see for anyone who can read. One of the most prescient texts about our epoch. Forster must have been someone who fully saw the truth of what modernity is, and how far, for example, what it is that Heidegger means when he says that the truth of metaphysics is something that we have to face up to. I think that what he says by this is what we are creating is what some call hyper-reality. But that's not just hyper-reality. It's that there's something much more profound going on. It's not just that we can upload everything to electrons and screens. No, there's something in history itself that's moving itself up into this realm of hyper-reality, if you like, and that we then access, and that downloads itself into us, while at the same time cutting us off from things. It's the weirdest thing in life, perhaps, to understand is, and it's not easy, is that being is nothing. That we if we want everything available, nothing will be available to us in the proper sense. There will be no thing, no being, while we have all the garbage that we could imagine. But on the profound level, what is happening is that the fulfillment of the Platonic cave, that the shadows are these extreme data sets and information about the past without us having any proper access to it. So thanks very much for